the welcome everybody, and thank you for attending. And let me welcome you to this topic that I have a lot of passion for. I've used the Myers-Briggs extensively now for about 25 years, and it seems consistently under fire. And so I've developed a way of seeing that criticism and a way of approaching that criticism in a way that I think is appropriate and tight. It might give you some extra arrows for your quiver. Let's understand why the negativity is there and how to turn that around to defend this tool that we use and like so well. So let's get into answering types, critics, and defending the MBTI. Thanks for coming today. And so what I would, let's see,
if you put your cursor on the screen, it'll help you click through it. It's when you're on video, it sometimes doesn't click through.
Sorry.
No
Sorry about that. And so the usually when we're talking about defending the Myers-Briggs, it comes down to a discussion of statistics. And debating statistics is tough, because while statistics are objective, their meaning is really debatable. Statistics rarely settle the critic's objections. Defending, therefore, the indicator requires understanding why the critics are so uneasy and addressing that unease and not falling back on just numbers. Now, in the discussion we're about to have, I'm going to throw a lot of suggestions out to you. I just want everybody to know that I have put together all of the basic summary of all this information, and it's in a handout that is attached to this webinar. You can see it in terms of the back webinar handout. Summarizes all of this, so you'll have it in writing. I want to talk about it, discuss it, answer some questions about it, but just know that you've got all these data. We will be moving pretty quickly through this topic to make sure we get all the points. So where we're going to go is to really start off with what the naysayers are saying. So what's all the criticism? And then why? Why are they being so negative and critical? I've found that most of the criticism comes from one of a very few directions. So how do we set the record straight? And then really specifically, what therefore do I say in response? And I've actually created big bold red slides that will, like neon signs, stand out in terms of therefore say this. And those are the things that I've captured in the handout so that you'll have those with you in the future if you agree with what I'm suggesting. And then I want to pause halfway through, as Susan mentioned, and at the end to talk about this more broadly and get any questions that you have. So again, thanks for being a part of this, and let's jump in. So when I started thinking about types critics, I just did a Google search in terms of what are some of the critiques out there, and I wanted them to be current. Just to show how present this was, and there are just a few that I came up with. So, debunking the Myers-Briggs, that was a BBC. Measuring the MBTI and coming up short, that was a somewhat of a research-based, allegedly out of Indiana University. So, goodbye to the MBTI, the fad that won't die, that was in Psychology Today. The mysterious popularity of the meaningless Myers-Briggs, that was a good one from Forbes. And then why the Myers-Briggs is totally useless but wildly popular. That was in the New York Times. And then I ran across Josh's blog, which was titled The Myers-Briggs Blows. And so, and Josh even misspelled Myers-Briggs. So clearly there are a lot of people out there that have a lot of time on their hands and that have some negative energy against the Myers-Briggs. And so my question then is, so why? You know, why so negative? And so there are basically three reasons, I think. And one is that somebody has a financial interest in a competing tool or a competing model. And another one, this is the big one that we'll explore, that people don't like the underpinning theory or the psychometrics of the tool. They don't like it or they don't understand it, and we'll explore that. That's the big one. And number three, somebody has had a negative past experience with someone using the MBTI. So someone has abused the tool in the past, and the tool is paying for it now. And so we'll end with that one. That's a big one too. Now, so let's start with the first one. It is an easy one to jump into, I think. Somebody has a financial interest in a computing tool. So many people have invested time and money, resources, and have an attachment to another tool. And so maybe it's the DISC, or maybe it's the 5-factor, the Big Five, or maybe it's whatever, anything else. And so many have created their own tool, even other type tools, to capture their own voices. Maybe I want to drill into a different nuance, or I want my voice to be out there, and maybe it's hope that I could get some of this money that now goes other places. I mean, well, there are a lot of different motives, but the bottom line is, but what do I say if I run across somebody whose ego and, more importantly, their wallet is tied to some other tool other than the Myers-Briggs assessment? And as hard as this is to say and hear and do, I would say, for those few cases, let it go. If someone else is invested in another tool, I would argue that no discussion of validity or instrument features or reliability, none of that, is going to change their economic structure. And so it's a subset of naysayers, and those are the ones you need to identify as such and let them go. The bigger group, and the one that causes more trouble, the one that's spawning most of these negative articles, are people who don't like the tool or don't like the theory. And so most MBTI criticism is rooted here. And so some people know the tool and theory and just don't like it. And so okay, that's true. I have met people who fully understand it and for whatever reason don't like it. But the vast majority of people, this is where we're going to focus, are people that are criticizing the tool out of ignorance. They don't really know what they're talking about. They're criticizing the tool for being something it is not. So that's where I want to really start our content here. And so what is the truth? If people are using the Myers-Briggs for something it isn't, well, what is it? And so I know if you're on this call, if you're on this webinar, then you know type. And some of you know type very, very well. And so I don't want to give you a type intro, but let me take just a few minutes and encapsulate Jung and Myers' work in a nutshell. And so let's review what Jung said and what Myers set out to capture with the Myers-Briggs. So the type theory, kind of in summary, is that Jung told us that all of life starts when you notice something. And you look out to the world around you and you engage it by taking in information. And we take in information through our perceiving function. That's the part of the brain that actually soaks in information. Now we can take in information. Our brains are capable of perceiving the world around us in two ways only. We can sense something, we can use a sensing function and see the world in a sensate, here and now practical way, or we can take in data through intuition. We can take in data that actually are more about possibility, imagination, the future, abstraction. Everybody does both of these. Everybody has a sensing function and an intuition function. You do them both, you might be good at them both. But we have a hardwired preference akin to handedness. We are hardwired to prefer one or the other. And that sensing intuition, that's our perceiving function. So the whole thing starts with perceiving. Once we have perceived something, we then need to make a decision. We have to decide something. It's good, it's bad, I like it, I don't. I have all the information I need more. I have to come to some judgment. And I do that using either T thinking or F feeling. I have them both. I use them both. I can be objective in my decision-making thinking or subjective, values-based in my decision-making feeling. I do them both, but I have a predisposition for one or the other. I default to one or the other. And at this point, that's the core of type. That's it. That's it. That my brain is wired to take in data, perception, and then make decisions on those data, judgment. And all I do cognitively is bounce back and forth between perception and judgment, using all four of these functions, preferring two, but using all four. That's type theory. Jung also said that the most important difference between us as people was going to be extroversion or introversion. The flow of our energy. Does your energy flow out to the world of people, places, and things? Or does the energy of the world flow inwardly to you, to your inner world of ideas, thoughts, and concepts? So one or the other was preferred, but we had these two worlds, an external world, an internal world, and our preference for this is going to be the most important, the most dramatic difference we have. Now Myers went on to add on to Jung's three dichotomies to pull out something that Jung actually implied. It's actually shows Myers' great genius, that of the two functions, perception and judgment, of those two mental functions, one of them was going to be our public face. One of them that the world is going to see, hear, and experience more than the others. And so if you are a judger, what that means is that your judging function is going to be public, is going to be on display. The world, when they engage with you, is more likely to hear from you a decision, closure, structure, order, planning, scheduling. Now, and then you're going to kind of keep your perceptions behind the curtain, under wraps. If, however, you're a perceiver, then the public face, the face you show the world, is going to be one of perception. That means it's going to look into options and spontaneity and adaptability and curiosity. You're going to be more facilitative, and that's because you're publicly gathering data, and your judgments are going to be behind the curtain. And so this what is your public face is what J and P added. It's a Jungian idea, but it is a Myers construct, and it's genius. And where you fall on the scale, it actually produces one of these 16 types. And this shows where you start, where you default, your mental activity and your preferences. That's what type theory shows us. So, therefore, what does the Myers-Briggs do? This is, I think, the essence of everything. The Myers-Briggs is a model that allows me to understand myself and my own cognitive tendencies. And so it actually allows me to have a vocabulary that lets me ask for what I want and what I need. It is a framework that allows really more effective development and leading, teaming, communication, because it not only gives me access to myself, it actually gives me a framework to understand you, the things we have in common and the things we have that are different. And it's brilliant. Now, so what do I say that the MBTI gives people? I mean, that I went on and on that slide, and so what do I say? I would say that the Myers-Briggs gives greater self-awareness, leading to better self-management. That's the essence, in my eyes. Greater self-awareness leading to better self-management. That's the primary gift of type. And so, in other words, type and the Myers-Briggs are about you understanding yourself. And so what the Myers-Briggs, therefore, if that's a true statement, what the Myers-Briggs doesn't do, and here's the linchpin, it does not measure skill or abilities. It doesn't and can't predict success. It doesn't denote the amount or the degree of behavior. It doesn't diagnose dysfunction or mental illness, or it doesn't point you in the correct career path. It doesn't suggest compatibility, either professionally or interpersonally, relationally. It doesn't do these things. Now, can we use the Myers-Briggs and type theory as an aid in some of these efforts? Yes, but it's not the primary tool because it doesn't do these 6 things. That's very important because most criticism and most pushback, all those articles, I got to tell you, I didn't read Josh's blog about the Myers-Briggs blowing, but other than that, all of those scholarly articles, all of which, by the way, were well written, were rooted in this, that it came back to the fact that people were trying to use the tool to measure, to select, to evaluate, to match and predict in a way that it was never intended, and that psychometrically it cannot support. And so they were using the MBTI for a purpose for which it wasn't intended. And so, to be specific, I pulled the 3, and so in my years of using type, here are the 3, in fact I call them the big 3, here are the big 3 misuses of type out in the world. And it's these misuses that create the overwhelming majority of the pushback with the tool. Number 1, there's the belief out there that someone's score on the indicator actually denotes the amount or the intensity of type. And number 2, there's an assumption that type predicts behavior. That's a big one. And then number 3, there's the use of type as a matching tool, either person to person, on eHarmony, or person to job. I've got these preferences, so what should I be doing professionally? So I want to look at both of those things. So we're going to go through this first one, which is a tough nut, and then pause for some questions. So just know that your questions are coming up, or time for your questions are coming up. I'm real interested in what's on your mind. Let's jump into this first one, MBTI, the big 3, misuse number 1. That many folks, if not most folks, I think, but believe scores denote the amount, the degree, the intensity of someone's type or its development. And that makes sense. They're still wrong, but that makes sense when you think about it, because the most instruments we take are actually plotted on a continuum. So when we get scores back on a continuum that looks like this, somebody can say, oh, well, clearly I'm a pretty strong F, but this person says, oh, but I'm an even stronger T. I'm like this uber T. If I get the results here, then that's, well, I'm a little of both. It really depends on the time and the place. I'm on the T side, but really I'm both. I'm a T/F. I'm a TF. And so it could very well be that the presentation of the scores has led to some misunderstanding, but because they look like and are often falsely even presented as if they're on this continuum, which means that the higher the score, the more you have. Which means that the closer to the middle, the more balanced you are. While there's logic to that, that is false. That is psychometrically not true of this indicator. And so the idea in terms of using the Myers-Briggs, you have to understand that it's a sorting tool. That if this is a trait or a continuous score, if this were a continuum and we could read the scores that way, then I realize, and so I'm going to talk about something to prove that it isn't. The trait or continuous scores display the relative difference in measured amounts of something. And so what that means is that the ends are mutually exclusive. The further are you out on one side, then the less of the other that you have. And so the more F you are, the less T you have, and vice versa. Well, while this is an easy idea for many to understand, it really causes some fundamental problems in terms of type. Here's an experiment that I do. and we're not going to do it for the for this webinar, but I want you to have this experiment in your back pocket to help prove this point the next person you're with or the next group you're with. When I'm with a group, I actually ask for where are the clear Fs, the people who got high scores in F, or the people who are F and they just are positive that their preference is for F. And then I ask this question only to those people with the raised hand. So to all the clear Fs, I ask, what's the square root of 25? And so I get a smattering of answers from the group that the square root of 25 is 5. Well, reading MBTI scores as continuous scores, so treating this as if it were a trait tool, means that we're connecting numbers to amounts. And in this world, a clear feeler would struggle with T decision making. If I'm high F, I don't do T, can't do T. That's what high F means, is that I really don't have access to T. And realize that the square root of 25 is a T question. That's a thinking question. That requires objective calculation. There's nothing subjective about the square root of 25. Now, you may have taken it, by the way, to an F place. I can't believe you just asked me a math question. Or, well, okay, that was F. Or that, you know, I really loved my 5th grade math teacher. Well, okay, that was F. But if you actually answer the question, well, you're using your thinking function, even if you prefer F. And so theory and practice tell us that this continuous reading of the scale are true. Having a preference does not indicate disconnection with its opposite. In fact, and this is what's so cool about Myers-Briggs data, that both data and practice tell us that the greater someone's type development, which means the more access they have and skill that they have with all the preferences, the greater their type development, the clearer the results tend to be. And so somebody, if this were actually a tool that could be read as on a continuous scale, then you would expect somebody with good type development who was good at T and F actually to have results that show up more in the middle, right on the edge, as if they were a little of both. Actually, that's not true. The older you get, the better your type development tends to be, and the older you get, the clearer your type preferences become. We have decades of data to support that. So remember that the MBTI is a sorting tool. The process of answering these forced choice questions is to help you identify not what you're good at, not how much of something you do, but what you prefer, where you are when the ball comes at you. Is your preference more for T? Is your preference more for F? And you aren't deeper into the bucket than other people, or but I'm in a bigger bucket. It's dichotomous. It's either or. So what do I say? And this is a huge question. I get it constantly. MBTI allows you to sort yourself into one of two buckets, a category, one or the other. The score denotes only the confidence we have that the sort was accurate. So how much clarity is there that you're in the right bucket? What's the confidence interval, if you will, that the sort was accurate? And so there are no amounts, and this can be very frustrating, especially to psychometricians, especially to people who really want to work this by the numbers. There are no amounts that matter, and scores upon which decisions should be made. That's a big one, and so let's actually go to some questions now. What questions do you have so far?
Great, thanks, Hile. Firstly, Michael Peterson asked a question. He said, in the Psychology Today article you mentioned, if he recalls correctly, the claim is made that 5-factor theory is the generally accepted standard among scientists today. And the MBTI is considered by scientists to be a pseudoscience. If they're correct about the stand of the scientific community, how would you answer the scientists?
And the scientists are, when we're talking science, we're talking numbers. So if we're arguing this, what they want to argue numbers. Now, the psychometrics of the Myers-Briggs is set up in this either-or way. And in order to play the game, in order to be in the science world, in fact, all of the psychometrics in terms of correlative studies and all of that, actually the Myers-Briggs scale has to convert itself, in a way, pervert itself into a continuous score. And so for every table, for every bit of psychometric research, because the field is full of measuring amounts, and how much are you versus how much am I, and being able to predict with scores, the Myers-Briggs has to convert itself into that world, and that's not what it's there to do. And so science has a history of trying to measure, compare, and predict. And that's not a bad thing to want to do. It's just that that's not what this tool is designed to do. So is it a pseudoscience? It's not, I wouldn't say that it's a pseudoscience. It's that you are, people go to the five-factor, that they go to the big five, because what it tries to do, it defines very narrowly these behaviors, it measures those behaviors, it compares those behaviors to other people, and then because of how your score comes out, it predicts what you're going to do next. And it does those things pretty well. If that's what you're into, that's great. It just so happens, and scientists do love that. The problem is that what the scientists love is definition, prediction, to nail somebody down and predict what they're going to do next. That's not what we need in the human development field. That's not what we need in the personal development and coaching field, is a tool that shackles me and casts me in a certain direction. It needs me to take ownership of my own self-awareness and how do I want to develop and what do I want to do. It needs me to come to the tool and engage it. The Big Five doesn't do that. And the Big Five is fine. I'm not knocking the Big Five, but it is about hard measure. The Myers-Briggs is an invitation to develop. It's a fundamentally different tool. So I don't disagree with what was in that Psychology Today article, but again, they're critiquing the Myers-Briggs for not being a tool it's trying not to be.
Great. And Sandra also said she has this helps, and she also has a colleague who's a psychometrician, if I pronounce that correctly, who insists there's no such thing as a bimodal distribution. I don't know how to respond to that.
And so the bimodal distribution a question is an interesting one, and the idea is traits distribute normally. They tend to distribute normally, so so if we're talking about height, some people have a whole lot of height, and and a few people have not very much height, but most people are normal height. In fact, that's how we know what normal height is. And when you put them all together, there's this bell curve, and so that's a normal distribution. Well, and that has a single mode, and so that has a single most frequent place that is occupied on that curve. Well, the Myers-Briggs scores, interestingly enough, and this is another bit of proof, by the way, that this is not a continuous score, is if you were to take 100 people who've taken the indicator and plot their extroversion, introversion scores, that you would have a bimodal curve, so like with two humps in it, because you'd have some people that were extroverts and some that were introverts, and within the extroversion, introversion, you'd have different degrees of clarity, and so there's this kind of two-hump thing, and so it's a curve with two modes in it. Now, a psychometrician looks at that, and their brains bend because what they see is clearly you're measuring two different things, and you're slamming them together. You've got an extroversion curve and an introversion curve, and so you can't force those two things together. Well, of course, you can if you're trying to measure someone's degree of extroversion, then you can. But if you're trying to, or somebody's introversion, then you can. But if you start with the assumption that they're these two fundamentally different things, and where do you start? Which do you prefer? What is troubling is when you start to apply numbers to that, and that's where you get this curve that looks like nothing else out there. And so if somebody wants to argue the numbers, then that's an argument that is going to be very frustrating, and you'll spin and spin and spin, as the field has been doing for 30 years. If you want to argue purpose, what's the purpose of the tool? If you're arguing numbers, and then we'll get back to this, so we'll jump back into the presentation after this, but if you're arguing numbers, and we come up to this later, what that means is that the instrument speaks for itself. The instrument is the outcome and is the important thing. If you're arguing development, I am the important thing. And the instrument just gives me data to feed my process. If that's what you're looking for, which, by the way, if we're talking organization development, leadership development, team development, anything that involves humans, then that is the work that we need, is for them to actually take control of their own development and be fed data from a value-neutral source. The Myers-Briggs, if that's what you're looking for, you won't find a tool better than the Myers-Briggs. And so let's, I'm interested in your questions, and we'll catch them at the end. I want to make sure we layer in the next couple of things.
Perfect.
So we'll jump back. And so so let's jump back in. We did the misuse number 1. Let's go to misuse number 2. This is also a really juicy one. That many people assume that not only does type predict behavior, they believe that type and behavior are actually the same thing. And this is a fundamental falsehood that causes so much confusion. So think about this, that type, if everything having to do with type and your hardwired preferences are contained conceptually within this circle, realize that there's another circle that has to do with your behavior being what you do and how you act. And so type and behavior are separate things, and it's hard to overstate the importance of this idea. I've not talked about Myers-Briggs in years that this concept hasn't come up. That now some of our behaviors are driven out of our type preferences, and so that, you know, the detail-oriented sensor, the directive judger, the quieter reflective introvert, and so I mean, some of that, and you'd expect, oh, that makes sense that you act that way, your preference is there. But realize there's some of our preference don't manifest behaviorally. They're swimming around below the surface behind the curtain and don't have a behavioral manifestation. And then, of course, some of our behavior requires us to step outside of our preference to engage it. I'm an introvert. I'm very clear in my preference for introversion, but yet I engage people, do keynotes and talk. I speak all the time. I mean, I have a very extroverted life, and sometimes you just have to pull on your big boy pants and do it. And so that's so realize that this difference is key. Your type and your behavior may overlap considerably, and that's somebody who just shows up in their life as them, and it naturally feeds their preferences. That's great work if you can get it. That's terrific. And there are other people, and there are many benefits to this as well, that there may be very little overlap. That your type preferences don't often come into play when it comes time to engage the behaviors that your roles or your profession or your life and relationships demand from you. And so the bottom line is that type is not behavior. And so this is important because when people say, and they say it all the time, well, you know, why do I have to choose between these two things? I do them both. You know, I think I'm right in the middle because I do some of this and I do some of this. So the answer is, of course you do. But type is about preference, not behavior. I do both of these. is a behavioral statement. In an 8-hour day, I do 4 hours of S and 4 hours of N. Well, okay, that might be true, but I'm not asking about what you do. I'm asking about what you prefer. That's underneath that. Sometimes you may even do more of a non-preference than a preference. Most of my working days, I log more extroversion than introversion, but that doesn't make me an extrovert. In fact, measuring how much extroversion I do isn't actually very helpful in illuminating my preference. It actually even kind of confuses my preference. Knowing your preference allows for better self-management and a more deliberate behavioral choice. Knowing this is what I prefer, now on that foundation, what do I have to go do? And so type is hardwired, but behavior is a choice. That phrase has helped me bring clarity to a lot of people, and so consider that it might be helpful to you. The type is hardwired. Behavior is a choice. And some of the scientific instruments that we were talking about earlier are very, very good, and they're designed to measure behavior. They're behavioral measures. And type hints at behavior, but it is not about behavior. That's the challenge. So, misuse number 3 of the 3. And don't forget, this is a lot of information. Don't forget that you've got a handout that summarizes all this for you. Misuse number 3. Too many people use the Myers-Briggs as a compatibility tool, and that reduces people to letters and codes, and they try and match sames up together in eHarmony and jobs. I've seen people go to career counselors who will say, well, if you're an ENFP, here are the jobs that you'd be good at. And so that's done with great frequency, and also that's very insensitive, not to mention incompetent. And so MBTI and career choice. Let's take this and leave the relational thing aside for a moment. MBTI and career choice. The 11 to 14% of the U.S. population, the United States population, is ISTJ. We know that through considerable research. Also, we've got somewhere between 28 and 35% of practicing accountants are ISTJ. We have accountants on file since the early 1970s, and so we've got very nice data on that field. And so, well, therefore, when you take a look at that, that ISTJs clearly make good accountants. ISTJs will be happy as accountants, and if you're not an ISTJ, you'll be a bad or unhappy accountant. And so, and those data prove that. Well, that of course is false. It's seductive to draw conclusions as sweeping as these, but it's also incorrect. And so here's what we know. Because we do know these things, what we can say is that given an accountant's typical duties, ISTJs tend to be attracted to that career because the things I need to do from 9 to 5 every day are things that tap that I, that S, that T, and that J more often than not. Also, I can say with great accuracy about those numbers that self-selection makes it 2 to 3 times as likely that you'll encounter ISTJs among accountants as you will encounter ISTJs while you're just walking down the street. They pool or self-select to the field of accounting, whereas you could also look at that conversely, that if the further away you are from I, S, T, and J, the more you tend to avoid. You're kind of repelled by the accounting field. You can say that too. But that doesn't talk about any individual. It just talks very broadly about preferences. So what? I mean, that's a lot of wind. What does that actually mean? So MBTI-related career stats, and there are lots of them. I start off in career development, and this is an area of real interest of mine. And so these stats show what careers tend to attract and repel different types. That's it. Where is there a gravitational pull and where is there a repulsion. Your knowledge of type lets you know what duties and behaviors may come easily and which may be more challenging, leading to a more informed choices and better self-management. And so how good a fit are you going to be? How much overlap is there going to be in your Venn diagram to your career and your type? And if there's not a lot of overlap, that doesn't mean it's not a good job for you. It just means how are you going to deal with the stretch? That's the key. You don't hire letters. You hire skills, abilities, and experiences, and none of those are related by MBTI results. So the MBTI should never, never be used to encourage, discourage, or certainly select for a career. It's malpractice, it's incompetent, and it's also very personally diminishing. So some people don't like the MBTI. Now, most criticism of the Myers-Briggs is rooted in people trying to overplay or overinterpret the scores. So we've talked about that. This practice makes the focus the indicator, not the individual. And so a great question we had right before we went back to slides is actually brought this up, that the more you focus in on the numbers, which by the way, the scientists and the psychometricians want to do. This isn't about you, it's about these data. And by using these data to understand you and make decisions about you, independent of you, the data should speak for themselves. And with trait-based tests, they should. I agree with that. It's just this isn't one of those. This practice makes this science makes the focus the indicator and not the individual. And so one of the things that you can like the MBTI or not, but you cannot fairly criticize a screwdriver for not being a hammer. That it's and realize that the vast majority of criticism that's coming at the Myers-Briggs is why doesn't it measure these traits as well as this other tool? And well, because the answer is it's not supposed to. And you would never criticize a screwdriver for not being a hammer. Why are you doing it here? And that's exactly what's going on. So what do I say? If you're looking for a tool to select, evaluate, to diagnose, to compare, the MBTI is not for you. And so it's not that that's a bad thing to want. Just don't look here. The psychometrics don't support your needs, and the underpinning model contradicts your efforts. Jung was not interested in doing that, and Myers was dead set on tying herself to Jung and Jung's ideas, and it was never intended to be that way. If, however, you're looking for a tool to empower an individual to gain self-awareness, leading to better self-management in all areas of life, which includes leadership and personal relationship, communication, conflict, all of it, then no tool is better than the Myers-Briggs. There are a lot of great tools out there, but you won't find one any better than the Myers-Briggs if what you want is self-awareness and better self-management. That is to say, if it's in the hands of a competent and caring trainer, counselor, or coach. And so let's talk one last point here, and it's very important to end on this one. Now, we've talked about why so negative. Well, some people have a financial or an ego investment in another tool, or they don't like the psychometrics or the underpinning theory of type. Most of number two we've learned is actually they don't actually get it. They actually don't know or accept the underpinning theory. But a big one to grapple with is that I've had a negative past experience with somebody concerning the Myers-Briggs. Let's talk about this one. I think it is very important, and I know there's some people and there's some publishers that actually, and that's not code for CPP, that actually they're publishers all over that don't like this idea for obvious reasons. But I think it's very important that you trust the trainer and not the tool. And this is something that your scientists will initially have to wrestle with as well. But the idea here is that the tool gets the blame when we, as trainers, fail. But realize that tools don't intervene. You know, tools don't learn. Tools don't make choices. Training and coaching testimonials are about the people and not the tools. Be very careful when you read a testimonial, whether it's for the Myers-Briggs or the Big Five or any tool that's out there, that actually says, I was having a lot of trouble, and then I came in and instrument X was administered, and now everything is great. Because that makes it seem like, wow, this tool did it. It didn't. Somebody put a really good training together. Some coach, some trainer, some consultant put something together that was compelling and experiential and competently delivered. And through that, these people woke up, took ownership of their own development, and moved forward. That's terrific. That's not the tool, and the tool gets some credit, but that's the trainer who did that. Now, likewise, you could have a great trainer who could take almost any tool, or no tool at all, into an organization and really create a great experience. So realize that we, as trainers in the field, get most of the credit and should have to take most of this criticism, should have to take most of this blame, not the Myers-Briggs. I wanted a deck on the back of my house, and but I didn't want a tool. I didn't hire a screwdriver. What I wanted a deck, and so I hired a contractor, and he happened to use an electric screwdriver in doing that. People want outcomes. They want growth. They want development. They want insight. The tool is secondary. Trust or blame the trainers, not the tool that they use. And so a great trainer can facilitate great learning, active, with nearly any tool or no tool at all. Like I mentioned, the best tool in the world, and the MBTI is in the running for that, can't save an incompetent trainer. And unfortunately, the Myers-Briggs has had to pay for that. So while the MBTI is a great tool, what matters more is how engaged as a group we will be with it, and how we'll put our learning to work once you're finished. And success comes from interactive training designs leading to implemented and followed up action plans. And so remember, the MBTI doesn't do the work, we do. And the MBTI is a tool that we choose to help us. And I think if we're smart, we'll continue to choose it. It's one of the most tested tools out there in doing what it seeks to deliver. But we have to come with some, actually present it as it is, not try and set it up for something it can't do, and deliver experiential designs and never lose sight of practical application. So know the tool well, but remember, the big deal is you. The big deal is us, the people who are actually giving it voice and giving it legs. And so let's go with our remaining time. I'm interested in the questions that you had.
Whilst people put in their questions, because a few were in earlier, how do we help people overcome the fact that and differentiate between the instrument and type theory? Because so often people use the word MBTI when they mean type theory and vice versa. And how do we overcome that one?
Well, I think the best practice that gets into that, and it's a nice habit to be in, is I would consistently, and most type certification emphasizes this, I would start off with, take the assessment, set it aside, and then let's talk about the structure of type theory. Jung said there's perception, and then there's judgment, there's this EI, and there's JP. And as we talk about it, and I even do experiential exercises where I'll use their assessment numbers to doctor some groups. I've got a group 1 and group 2. Now I know that's likely S and N. We'll see if they validate that way. But to see, can we get some experiment data to really see them? And the scientists, by the way, push back on this, have a lot less to push back on when I actually can pull a group together, throw in the group's ignorance and assignment at them, and predict what they come up with. And so that's a great way of doing that, and have people kind of assess their type preferences as we go. I think I'm more of an S. I think I'm more of an E. And then once all of that has happened, you go quickly through that in 90 minutes. I think it's better to spend 2.5 hours on it if possible. And so to have a really good, robust understanding of the model and where I think I am in it, then I get my results back. And now, not only am I educated in type theory, I have my MBTI results, and I can see, oh, yep, I'm an INFP, and this says INFP. I just confirm those, and there'll never be anything that can shake that now that I've had that experience. Or maybe I'm a letter off. Maybe I thought I was an extrovert, and this says I'm an introvert. So why is that? Well, that's one of those Venn diagram forces that my preference is doing one thing and my behavior is pulling another, and so what's that about? I think setting that process up of walking through and having somebody self-assess before they get their results back helps keep those things separate and is the single best validation step that we can do.
Okay, great. Let me have a look. Sandra says, Sandra, your hand's raised. Do you want to try and raise your question verbally if you've got sound?
What are the big 5?
And so the big 5 is a and shoot, off the top of my head, it's actually an assessment that is closely rooted to Jungian theory, but a behavioral manifestation of Jungian theory. It's there's with one additional scale on it, and but it has to do with that there's one that's akin to extroversion. There's one that's a relational one, and I don't remember the 5 words. I've taken it, but I'm not a user of it. Susan, do you happen to know the 5 scales?
I don't know. Angelina, do you have a mic? You probably know the big 5, right?
Oh, hang on. Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted. This is Angelina.
Okay. I always remember it by the acronym of OCEAN. So it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And the first 4 correlate with MBTI if, like you say, you create these false scales, but nothing correlates with neuroticism. And that's one of the big criticisms, is the MBTI is not a complete theory because it doesn't cover neuroticism, which talk at on length, but I'm not going to.
and that's the and so that's those are the big 5, and they and the thing is, if you trying to define this, so openness and extroversion is defined by the big 5, and so if you're trying to define these things and measure, and so how much do you have versus how much do I have, and so given your amount and my amount, which one of us is more likely to do X in the future? If that's what you're after, then the big 5 is a fine tool. I don't do that kind of work, and I think you should pick the tool that is more appropriate for the task at hand. And that's anyway. So that was the point there. But anyway, thanks for the question. We've been throwing the name around. It'd be nice to have more data on it.
Sandra also, thanks ever so much, Angelina, especially when I put you right on the spot there. Sandra, you also said, can you also ask how to respond to students who ask about the MBTI's test, retest reliability, and its various types of validity in 4 minutes or less?
Well, and so 2 things. Let me do a quick swipe on that. And so the reliability is a pretty easy one in terms of test, retest reliability. There are, most people when they talk about reliability are talking about test, retest reliability over time. And the higher your clarity, the greater the reliability. And so test retest is actually formulated on a scale-by-scale basis. And so really the Myers-Briggs psychometrically is 4 assessments woven together. There's an EI reliability, an SN reliability, and an overall reliability is good. But what the number is, it depends on the scale and depends on the clarity that you're talking about. And so I don't have a quick answer, but in terms of the reliability of the Myers-Briggs is fairly sound. People who are taking a numbers approach to their criticisms of the Myers-Briggs are more accurate to come at it through a validity standpoint. Now, reliability is consistency of the data. Validity is the accuracy of the data. Validity, frankly, is a bigger issue. And so that you could read volumes on that. There's construct validity, a criterion validity, predictive validity, face validity. There are a number of different kind of validity measures. And so if you're interested in a numbers approach, which is what I try to intentionally avoid in this discussion, but I know that the numbers are still important. What I will do is point you to the handout, because there are 2 write-ups. One by the chief psychometrician at CPP, and it was actually written and posted on the blog in response to Adam Grant and one of these venomous, the Myers-Briggs is so stupid articles. It was printed somewhere. And so it was a great psychometric summation on defense of the Myers-Briggs using the numbers. And also, my favorite one that I've ever read is actually by Roger Pierman, who's been in the world of type for a long, long time. And so on the handout, there are links that can take you to both or either of these write-ups and give you specific, let's talk criterion validity, let's talk construct validity, and here's how the numbers match up. So you've got access to that.
Excellent. I'm looking at time here, Hile. Let me see. There's some very long ones here. Yes, Jeff talks about always having individuals self-assessed beforehand. And everything is most valuable for those who administer and interpret the MBTI. So is there anybody else who wants to just raise a quick verbal question? Sorry, I've got 2 screens, which is why I look away over here. Anyone? If so, just sort of raise your hand. No. And again, we have a fantastic handout. Valerie asked, are we getting copies of the slides? And we had talked about that and said it's unlikely you're going to be running this as a session. So what Hile's very graciously done is given us all the key answers, and I particularly like the clarity and confidence of choice, because I get so irritated with this strength of preference stuff that people say. It just drives me absolutely crazy, and the fact that it's been criticized for what it's not supposed to be doing anyway, which is measuring and evaluating. So well, Hile, what a fantastic webinar. I don't know if you want to stay a couple of minutes, or we'll just hold on for a minute or so if anyone wants to say any last minute thank yous. I've got some nice, great thank you from Sandra, fantastic content from Angelina, and Olga just says, please talk about the model, how the model corresponds with the theory. Why is in introverted functions are introverted? Is it legible, credible? Gosh, that's a whole saga about cognitive processes there, isn't it?
And well, so are the instrument results credible with introverted processes?
I'm not sure why in introverted function. I don't know if it means. Olga, have you got a microphone that you could maybe just ask what you just said? I'm not seeing it. Looks like she's. Oh yeah, no, you're still there. Let me unmute you. If you've got a mic, Olga, maybe you need to just unmute yourself. Maybe you can ask the question. It wasn't quite clear in the questions log there.
Oh, hello. Do you hear me now? Yeah.
We do, Olga. Yes, thank you.
Okay. What bothers me? You know, I don't know MBTI very well, but I'm sort of looking into it. I do not understand why in introverts, if you look at the function, so the second function is like extroverted. It's like more important or something like that. You know. Because if it is an introvert, it's supposed to be the major function should be introverted, but somehow it's an opposite.
Okay,
Go for it.
I understand. And this is not something that is that the Myers-Briggs or the Myers-Briggs scores have anything to do with. And so so you can't look at a report form and tell you what's my dominant function, what's my auxiliary function, by looking at the scores. And so for this question, it's a great question. Let's set the MBTI report aside and let's talk about type theory here. Now the type theory says of these that we have a dominant function of so sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, of these 4 functions. One of those is going to be dominant. And Jung said that it's the most ego-identified, it's our superior function, it kind of takes the lead and gives us so much of who and what we think we are. And that function really lives, it operates in our preferred world, either extroverted or introverted. And so, in fact, that's what Jung, how he defined extroversion. An extrovert is somebody whose dominant function is focused out in the world. An introvert is somebody whose number one function is held inside, internally to them. That was actually the definition of extroversion and extroversion. And so, now the thing is that we need, for balance, we need that second function. And so, if your dominant function is about making decisions, E or F, doesn't matter. Well, then your second function really is there to provide the boss with information so that these decisions can be made. Or if your dominant function is about gathering data and being open, then that second function needs to come in and make decisions, enough decisions to at least keep the boss open to collecting more data. And so that second function is critical, is very important. But it can't live, Jung suggested, in the same world with the boss. It can't live in the same world with the dominant. So, Olga, if you don't mind my asking, what's your type?
My type is ISFJ.
Okay.
ISFJ. Okay. And so your dominant function, type theory suggests, is introverted sensing, is an internal sense of archive, past, detail, specific, procedural data. It's an archive of your past experience, detailed, historically rich, awesome, vibrant. Now that has so much gravitational pull to that introverted sensing space, that if feeling also existed in your internal introverted world, you'd never plug into the world. You'd never come out. And so the only way that your judgment can actually develop, suggested Jung, was because it operates in this external world. And so both the boss and the subordinate, the number one and the number two, each have a world that they, for the most part, occupy so that they can each have their space. And we all need a room of our own. And that's the tension there. And so for an introvert, it doesn't mean that second function is more important. It's just the one that's seen more.
That's the point. That's what people see in the external world. They'll possibly see that decision-making function, but they may not be aware of the information that's pouring into that from your dominant function. That's exactly right.
Right. Which is why, by the way, Olga, I love this question. That's one of the reasons why introverts are so often misunderstood and underestimated, because this function that's really the consuming and ego identified, and really the center of gravity is one that the world often doesn't even know exists. And so introverts are very easy to underestimate for that reason. I hope that was helpful. I love the question.
And it gets asked. Good.
Yes, does it mean that my leading function is extroverted? If my second function is introverted, how you described it, but that means my leading function is extroverted. That's what it means.
No, it means your dominant function is in your preferred world, which is your internal world, which is your sensing, introverted sensing, and then you make decisions externally using extroverted feeling, and that's your auxiliary function. That's what ISFJ means.
Okay, all right. And what is seen my dominant function is my introverted sensing is in you said it is seen more. My introverted sensing is
no, I think people see your extroverted feeling because that's what's manifested in the external world, and they may not be aware of this incredibly rich data bank of sensory information that is actually your preferred way of gathering data. So they won't see the sensing, they'll tend to see the extroverted feeling.
Okay, I understood. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Susan's done some great writing on this, so you're going to the source here.
Well, listen, I'm aware that we've run 10 minutes over now. Olga, there's lots of books out there, plus we've got the BAPT conference coming up in April where we talk about all this stuff, and the International APTI conference next year, so do keep on our list. Hile, an amazing session, really, and thank you so much for investing your time, for contributing the handouts, and it's so nice to hear such quality content about what's such a current topic. So thanks very much. I'm going to stop recording now. I don't know if that means I'll lose you, Hile, but we'll be ending the webinar in respect to Hile, and do please reach out with any other questions or comments. So thanks.